And we are live. Hey, this is Max Hangs Out here with a hangout about Catholic ethics and secular ethics. Joining me is Baldie the Limey, MyContext, and Negation of P. We're going to share our own background in ethics, our own beliefs, and we're also going to compare and contrast our viewpoints, what we might find troublesome, what we might even like about our interlocutors' viewpoints on the matter. And I'll take it away by allowing Negation to share his view on ethics, then MyContext, followed by Baldie the Limey, and I'll add anything if need be. So, Ned, take it away.
All right. Thanks for having me, man. This is really fun. I like stuff like this. But as far as, I guess, where I come down on morality, ethics, kind of bleed them together. I know that's not technically right, but let's have a little fun. I kind of blend naturalism with a somewhat utilitarian type approach. And what I mean by that is the foundation that I feel where morality in general came from is, and I hate using this term, but for lack of a better term, it's self-emergent when it comes to herd-type animals. Any animals that travel in packs have to work together. And if we look throughout the animal kingdom, what we see in nature is that the more cooperative a species, the more dependent a species may be on one or two individuals, the more ethical, at least from our standpoint, what we would perceive, those animals are going to be. Everything from dolphins to, as Ozymandias actually pointed out to me at one time, the most ethical animals are honeybees and those type of creatures, in that a worker bee, all of the drones, will sacrifice themselves down to the very last drone to protect the queen. And the reason for this is the only reason that you're going to be able to have any type of lineage, have any type of your genetic information passed on, is by protecting that queen, because she's the only one that can reproduce. And in the same way, as far as humanity goes, the more that we cooperate, the more that we empathize with each other and make our society something that we can propagate in and be safe in, the better chance we have of continuing our lineage as well. And I would argue that that is really our only advantage. Having a brain that is empathetic enough and intelligent enough to be able to cooperate is the only reason that we can survive at all. Put us in an environment that we're not there and we don't do very well. So from that standpoint, that's where I feel ethics stems from. As far as my test to what is ethical, what is moral, is going to be, does it, if adopted by the entire species at a special level, would it help or would it harm? And what I mean by that is if, let's take it to the extreme, we're always going to get there, killing babies. It's going to get there, guys. If the species took on that as a norm, as something that was an ethical act, that I think we all could look at and say that's going to be problematic for the species in the long run. And therefore, to me, it makes perfect sense why we would gravitate away from that type of action. And that's kind of the filter I use to determine what is good, what is bad, and vice versa. Max, I hope that was enough. I didn't want to take up too much.
That is. Cool, thank you for sharing. And just to clarify one thing, would it be fair to say that your system is very pragmatic in terms of it caters mostly to human usefulness? And second of all, would you say that your theory is subjective in that it relates to human psychology much more than it does to any external property that's out there in nature itself?
Yeah, absolutely on both those fronts. I would agree with that, no problem.
All right. MyContext, would you share your own ethical beliefs? And also, because secular ethics is much more broader than Catholic ethics, would you also mind sharing where you might disagree with negation, so that way you're not stepping on each other's toes during the discussion.
At this moment, for the most part, I don't hear any real disconnect between me and the negation of P.
Oh, all right.
I do use aspects of utilitarianism as well as consequentialism. But I guess there's an aspect of virtue ethics in there, in that there are certain things that I consider as guiding principles that one that is appropriate to adhere to, like the general idea of being supportive of the well-being of the populace, or working against things that are an assault to the general well-being of the populace, are kind of guiding principles. One of the initial things, when the earliest notion of, shall we say, in that fudge factor of morals slash ethics, that I understood as a kid was the idea of fairness. And the concept fairness was actually interlinked to the idea of good, such that if you were unfair, you could not be considered good. And there are certain demands that came with the idea of claiming something. So if you said that a person was good, there should be something that you can claim of them doing that you can show that represented that quality. The same thing for being evil or bad. There would be something being done that would demonstrate that. Otherwise, you really don't have anything to claim. But that's about it. We can continue from my standpoint.
Oh, thank you for sharing. And the point about fairness, just so I can comment on that, is something ethicists really look to in terms of normative qualities of what we ought to do. One of the more famous ones is John Rawls. What he was very famous for was, I forget the technical name for it, but essentially imagine society, the veil of ignorance. Imagine you could construct a society, but in doing so, you have a veil of ignorance in where you're going to end up. So randomly speaking, you could be on the lowest tier or on the highest tier. Considering the veil of ignorance, how would you set up that society? And the point of the veil was to show that it was in fairness to any class of persons that would be in such a society. So it's good that you touched on that, and I think it's something a lot of people, when forming their ethics, should focus on, all things considered. So, Baldie, would you take away describing the Catholic view of ethics?
Thomas Aquinas.
Well, you're going to have to elaborate a little more on that.
Well,
that name will hold historical importance for a lot of people.
The Catholic view usually takes a natural law stance, excuse me, when approaching ethical questions. Usually it's a teleological process. We look via Aristotelian precepts, what the final good of something is, what is it supposed to do, and if it fulfills that, it is a good thing. So when asking a question about killing babies, for example, and it's funny you bring that up considering the whole abortion debacle, but when asking, should I kill this baby, usually we have to ask, well, what is the purpose of babies? The purpose of babies is to ultimately carry on the human project to propagate the species. That is a good in and of itself, because it is the purpose of the human being. Therefore, killing babies is wrong. So that would be one sort of very, very broad example of what a natural law would look like in practice.
Okay. So this system would be so the Catholic system, it would be fair to say, differs from divine command theory systems, which are more exemplary of Protestant ethics, wherein God, something being good is a matter of some relation in terms of God commanding it.
Yes. Catholic theology and ethical questions usually don't take a divine command theory form. We realize that God, being the ground of all being, all virtue and all good, is eventually, at some point has its beginning in Him. But that's the same with everything in existence, because He's the ground of all being. The main point with natural law is that it presupposes if you like. The fact that there is a creator who designs, which is why we have a purpose to think about a natural law for. So when I say what is the purpose of this human being, well, there might be many different purposes for that human being. God might have purposed that human being to be in a certain place at a certain time to do a certain thing. But on a very general level, God has purposed that human being to be alive and to live out his life, and in the normative state of things to reproduce. So we can sort of make judgments based on natural observational things. So what makes a good man? A good man is someone who is loyal, because loyalty is the best way to carry on the species, and blah 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 blah. Really, you need to have someone posing the question, and then you need to think on a teleological basis and see if you can get to that final cause, to see if you can find the telos of whatever it is you're talking about, and see if it's fulfilling that telos.
And and the last part is that there are moral obligations given to Catholics in particular that aren't given to everybody, and these are de fide. So while something like "thou shalt not murder" will apply to all of mankind or humanity, something like "you must go to Mass on Sunday" is something that all Catholics must do as a point of morality, but it's not something that is binding on either negation of P nor MyContext.
Yeah, but even then, that would be a natural law type thing. What is the purpose of Catholicism? The purpose of Catholicism is to save you. How do you fulfill that end? You do Catholicism. How do you do Catholicism? You go to Mass on Sunday. So, it's even there, it still follows a teleological process.
Okay. So with that out of the way, where do you guys want to begin the discussion? I'll kick it off to maybe Ned.
Okay. I mean, as far as I'm sure you understand, I'm going to have some concerns with divine command theory.
Oh, well, actually, neither me nor Baldie are divine command theorists.
Oh, okay. I misheard him then. Okay, sorry about that. Well, then I guess that's where I would start. As far as basing a good versus bad type situation, let's say in historical context, well, let's use the Bible, and the historical narratives there. If something's written in one of the historical... Go ahead.
I'd like to interject a little point.
Oh, go ahead.
When we're talking about good, bad, right, wrong, or whatever, it would help if we have a criteria by which to make those words meaningful. Because the moment we jump in without actually having to find those words, it becomes, well, this ambiguity tends to settle in all over the place in varying degrees.
In our thought, something that fulfills its telos is good.
All right.
Its purpose. So you're presuming a purpose in order to call it good. So if something's purpose was to kill other things, that would be good as well?
It would be good in the sense that it fulfills its purpose. However, whether it was ethically good would be entirely a different matter.
G.K. Chesterton has a very interesting quote on the matter. If a man were to shoot his father at or if a man was to shoot his grandmother at 200 yards, I'd say he's a very good shot, but I wouldn't say he's a very good grandson. So there is a distinction. So when we say something is good, it's not always the case in the same sense. So for example, whenever humanity or human beings are bound to their ends because as rational beings they can apprehend them and they are committed to them. So let's compare. So man is in his nature, or humans are in their nature, rational social animals. So we believe that universals actually exist. They're instantiated by anything which is in fact human, and because we're social rational animals, the ends of what exemplifies this particular universal or essence is our good. But let's compare and contrast that to the telos of...
Hold on for a second. Let's hold up for a second, because you said a lot in there.
Right.
That
You need anything
is,
clarified?
well, no, that's actually in that's contested actually.
Oh, okay.
When you say that we're rational, I don't see that we're necessarily rational. In fact, based on everything that I observe about us, we tend to be rather irrational, and we will use rationality for our justifications, but not that we are intrinsically rational about the various things that we consider. There is a rather biased use of rationality when it is present quite often. It's usually in service to something, not necessarily it in and of itself.
Right.
How are you defining rationality?
Well,
In
go
the
ahead.
case, the way I'm defining rationality is in the context of reality, to the extent that you can claim it, or in some way substantiated and having a reasonable chain of linkages. Even within a thought, regardless of whether one considers that thought to be real or imagined, even within that linkage, there's usually a lot of breakages wherein you can't even claim rationality within that construct.
So, from what I gather, it's the capacity to reason from premises to a conclusion about the nature of reality itself.
Or anything else, for that matter, at times. Yes.
Right. For example, we can reason all day long about Spider-Man, but at the end of the day, Spider-Man is still a fiction.
Correct.
Correct. All right. So
well, that's one aspect. But see, then there's the, if we were reasoning, let's say, Superman will survive kryptonite.
Right.
Although everything in our mythos says that that's not so, you will have people who will reason to the contrary for whatever reason, but none of that's substantiated. And it doesn't really matter in what frame we're talking. We still get the same disconnects of capacity.
Right. So
it still seems to me that... okay, go on.
Just so I can quickly answer. When I say human beings are rational social animals, I don't mean to say that that excludes us from acting irrationally, or that doesn't even include bouts where we do act irrationally in a lot of situations. But what I am saying is that our faculties are geared towards the end of using reason, no matter what. It's even though reason might be like a publicist, let's say by analogy, where we just intuit values and things we want to be true and then tries to rationalize them afterwards. There's some things that reason will not permit us to do. Like, it physically hurts us to accept contradictions about the way reality is. So
no, I'm not going to say contradictions about reality. I'm going to say contradictions in themselves.
Even contradictions in themselves.
Yeah, right. Because it's clear that there's all sorts of conflicts, but within the construct of a person's mind, if they don't see any contradictions, everything is fine.
Yeah, that is very much the case. But maybe just giving our evolutionary history, if we didn't evolve to possess the faculty of reason, we wouldn't be as formidable a machine for surviving, or a formidable organism in surviving. I think we can all agree to that much. Like, it's far better to have reason than not to have it.
I'll say that as a bias of preference, but I accept it.
Well,
Awesome.
here's my issue with what you're saying. Context.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Max. No, this is towards context. Wouldn't the attempt at rationality count as evidence for the fact that human beings are intrinsically rational?
Do you make a distinction between rationality for the purpose of actually making a good decision, or versus convincing others of a position?
Well, what I mean is rationality in trying to substantiate one's belief in something or reach a conclusion that one would deem to be satisfactory.
I will say,
our entire operation of modern science rests on the assumption that we are intrinsically rational and able to observe the world, right? So even
Actually,
if we
yeah,
fail at
yeah, no, because our scientific process is designed to address our failings when it comes to a lot of our rationality.
That is true. In fact, that's
Okay,
why we have things like double-blind studies.
exactly.
Yep.
And it is because that of our propensity not to see things clearly,
but you
not to
still
reason
need to
things.
engage your reason
I
and
grant that we
process
have
the evidence.
Well,
I grant that we have the facility, but the degree to which we engage the
That's
facility.
all I needed. The facility, the admission of there being a rational facility would be all that I needed, because I think that's all we need to agree on to be able to move on with the
yeah,
ethics.
actually, we did agree on that earlier.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I grant that. I'm just
Yeah.
concerned about the use of it. That's all. Continue.
Right.
well,
Right.
but I think the other end of it is if we don't grant that, if we don't use that as a starting point, then we're going to be, for lack of a
Dead.
better term, down this rabbit hole all night long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's one facet of us. Humans are essentially rational, not in the sense of us always being rational, but in the sense of having a faculty that's geared towards a coherent understanding of the world, and even to some extent, a correct understanding of the world. And also, we're also social animals in the sense that we're not lone wolves. Aristotle said it best: if there is a man who claims that he doesn't need society, I would either think him to be a god or to be an animal. Um, the notion, or a brood, I believe. The notion there is human beings need one another for survival. You have, like, linguistic development is one good example of this. Feral children. If anyone's familiar with that, that's when a child isn't raised to learn a language or know mathematics. Some of these kids are even raised by animals. After that, they're not even capable of learning any of those faculties because they're past that age of development. So that's another essential quality. And just based around those two things, that there are going to be virtues, and in normative ethics, I'm a virtue ethicist. In terms of virtues, there are going to be some virtues that better exemplify this essence, if you will, than other things. So, for example, the virtue of loving somebody. If you have a society where everybody cares about each other and wills the good for one another, you're going to get a society that develops these faculties far better than societies that don't. And this is where things like sociology can come in handy, and this is where I think ethics is good to open itself to social sciences. Is there any disagreement thus far with our position? If not disagreement, then at least...
Oh, no. I have no issue. I will ask, is there anyone who would oppose the idea of morality being a hierarchy of values that a person holds?
I would not. In fact, I think it's very necessary. Take the very famous trolley problem. You have one person and five persons, and the trolley's heading straight for five people. Most of us would have no problem flipping the switch to save five people if it meant the consequence of one person dying. But what if that one person was your own son? We have commitments to our families, I believe, far greater than to people who are strangers to us. So I think the hierarchy is definitely something we have to consider.
Max, that might be a really interesting place to start, because I mean, to me, that's a very interesting question when it comes to kind of y'all's stance. Our gravitation toward our own would seem to make perfect sense if we're looking at it from a genetic preservation standpoint, trying to get our own genes onto the next level. Where I don't see the connection is from a religious standpoint. If we have these goals, if we have these directions that are outlined either, because of the way that God wants us to go, kind of how Aquinas lays it out, or kind of being almost preordained, or either through, let's say, God just set out for lack of a better term, a foundation of laws, it would seem that it wouldn't make sense that we would gravitate so much toward our own lineage. We would care more about either what God has ordained us to do.
Could I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead.
I see what you're saying here. I would like to make a small correction to your description of Aquinas and our stance.
Okay.
But even before I do that, I'd like to say that there is a big difference in discussing morality and ethics, and which one are we discussing here tonight? But Aquinas himself believed that God is the ground of all being. The ground of all being that everything that exists or will come to exist has its beginning in God. The Bible calls it all good things come down on lights from the Heavenly Father. So it's not God setting out precepts for us to follow, it's us being in line with the very nature of God. Now, if you think of the Christian notion of God, whether you hold to it or not, we believe in a triune God, a Trinity, where we have Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, where Holy Spirit is breathed back and forth between the Father and Son like love. So it would make absolutely perfect sense then if God is the foundation of all being, for Christians to care very much for their offspring, considering that we see in God's nature in the Gospels great care taken over Jesus. We see a massive amounts of this father, son, children, parent analogy between God and the church. So it makes perfect sense for Christians to worry about their little ones, not just because we want them to pass on not just because we want to pass on our genes to our grandchildren through them. I'm sure that's a biological drive, but even that biological drive is descriptive of the relationship we see in the Holy Trinity. We want to see the good for the other, and in this case, our children.
Well,
I have
Context,
just one challenge. Define how evil is or bad is associated with your concept, given the foundation that you're claiming.
Oh, okay.
Privation.
If you don't feel, I'll fill this one. Yeah, actually, it's privasion. So when we say that evil is a privation of the good, this is what we mean. And it goes back to Aristotle's distinction between act and potency. So to say that something is act is to say that this is what it is. And whenever we say something is in potency, we're speaking to what it could potentially become. So, for example, right now I am currently a human being, but what you are looking at here, the human, has the potential to be a carcass, lifeless, losing the faculty of rationality and any ability to socialize whatsoever. Furthermore, I could turn into ashes if I was just burned alive. Such other things. So as I currently am a human, I have an underlying potential to be other things as well. Evil is also a type of potency. So not while all evils are potencies, not all potencies are evils. So I have the potential to walk an old lady down the street. That's something that existed in me as a pervasion of what I could become, but it's not what I currently am.
Would it also be fair to say that, I mean, again, maybe I'm mixing up Aquinas with somebody else, but I thought that he was going more along the lines that we have a directed end. There's when God set things in motion, there were certain, for lack of a better term, maybe not
goals or
we would think it right. I mean, the potential that is there. God wants us to go to whatever that end is, and if we stray from that direction, that would be more toward the sinful side. Whereas if we are taking action to get to that end, we're more along
I can give you
Yeah, exactly.
the
So,
example Aquinas uses if you like.
Yep.
Actually, just to add on to what Ned said, that what he said is perfectly correct. So evil is the pervasion of that end, evil is when we purvey that end being actualized, wherein goodness is when that end is actualized.
Okay. Yeah, Baldie, if you want to give that example, that'd be great.
Aquinas uses the example of an archer. So let's say that you or I set out one day to try and do an action. It doesn't have to be any specific action, but an action. Our effort is considered shooting the bow, right?
Right.
Now the target is considered the objective morality, right? The telos, what the end of that action is supposed to be, right?
Correct.
And the arrow represents one's intent. If you miss, if your intent misses the telos, Aquinas calls that sin. And if you hit the telos, Aquinas calls that good.
There's
Whether
where
you
we have
agree with
this-
that analogy of Aquinas or not doesn't really hold much bearing because analogies break down at various points.
Well,
Yeah,
no, but that's where the disconnect is. Because what is that focal point of goal?
So,
well, that's where I guess that my underlying my underlying foundation, if you will, for any ethical stance from any position is that you've got to something that is ethical to one person won't be ethical to someone else because of, just like you said, context is their goals are different.
right,
And
and this is the distinction between ontology and epistemology that's very needed. Because right now we've been given the ontology of goodness and evil, whereas I think what we're inquiring now is, MyContext has repeatedly told me in various threads, how do we adjudicate the two, which is more in tune with epistemology. How do we tell what is good and what is bad?
right.
Right.
But getting back to the other aspect, I think that there's a couple of, at least what I see from, for lack of a better term, the outside looking in, a couple of problems. And if Aquinas is right, and if God is that way, it would seem that God himself has a goal for apparently each one of us, and that if we don't reach that goal, that would seem that God, either through forethought, knew we were going to fail, and therefore what he stated was the goal was not in fact the goal, or he was inept in that he wasn't able to facilitate that goal.
I think we're trying to impose a different set of, when we talk about natural theory, and I want to get this back to ethics because epistemology, morality, and ontology don't actually deal with ethics. Ethics is the practical application of one's moral values, right?
Yeah, I definitely like that too.
So one could we could get into the whole idea of predestination and all the rest of it, but that would not be part of, it's not part of what we'd agreed this discussion would be, and it's not what people are watching us for. What I will say, just to quickly address it, is this. When one talks of natural law, especially in Aristotelian metaphysics as well as in Aquinas' thought, one is not talking about God's in like special purposing for each human being. We're talking about normative purposing. What are the observable ends of humanity? What makes a good human being? What makes a good is what makes a good knife? Do they fulfill that final cause? That final cause being fulfilling of something, fulfilling something that would seem to not abrogate, but conclude their design. I don't know. You have to forgive me. I got up at 1:30 a.m. to do this show.
Go to bed.
it is the looking. So what makes a good hand? A good hand is something that can hold a pen and write and all the rest of it, right? So that would make a good hand. What makes a good man? A good man is someone who can feed his family because that would help him propagate the species.
Um,
And I
so,
get that, and
if I
I won't drag this out because I know we're kind of going down the wrong direction if you want to look at it that way. But just to just to kind of put a lid on it, I would love to go back into that because to me that's very problematic. There's so many things that just loose ends, and I'll leave it there because I know if I start picking at it, it's going to unravel and we're going to get
It's an
completely off of the path.
entirely
I want to
different
be,
hangout.
Exactly.
so the thing about natural law is, though, and I think it needs to be stressed, no one needs to. So to know that something is ethical, one doesn't necessarily need to know that God exists. Granted, where we believe that ethics has to be grounded in God, which is a metaphysical claim. The epistemological claim about natural law ethics is these are particular ends that are ascertainable through the observation of nature in its own right. So we're ethical naturalists. We believe that people can come to correct understanding of what is good or bad based on observing the right patterns in nature. And when we observe human beings, when I brought up man as a rational and social animal, these are things that I didn't need to open a Bible to pick up. These are things that a lot of people can observe in nature itself, and these are facts that have, if not been verified by social and biological sciences, at least don't really contradict that, nor are psychological experiences. And
Just to be just to be clear, Max, those are objective states, right? Not subjective states.
right.
Okay.
So Catholics are of the opinion that universal essences do exist, whereas universals have been eschewed or not really been paid attention to, completely ignored, or even denied in modern sciences. Like, we don't talk about essences when doing biology, nor do we talk about it when doing physics or even chemistry. These are discussions, these are things that don't need to be brought up for the scientific discourse. And we believe that but because we believe essences actually adhere in human beings, that they are objective and apply to all those who would count as humans.
You might want to
So,
define essences.
right. So an essence is essentially the properties that make you a member of the class that you're in. So man is a rational. So Aristotle would say man is a rational animal in the sense that we're animals. We have a biology. We eat, shit, do all that fun stuff, copulate. But at the same time, we have a rational faculty which separates us from brute animals. We have the ability to do high-level mathematics. We have the ability to construct logical syllogisms and apprehend universals, even if one denies universals. One still, in a sense, make universals or tends to apprehend the world as such, regardless. So this is why we claim to be objectivists as opposed to subjectivists. Whereas I'm not sure what you guys would claim to that matter. You guys both said you are subjectivists in that state. So would you claim that morals don't exist in the sense of having their own ontology, but rather they're things that are pragmatically beneficial to acknowledge rather than not acknowledge?
I would say that they're more dependent, and what I mean by that is that they're goal based. And if you change the goal, then your complete ethical structure will change. In that, and I mean, we can see that very well when we look at someone that we would consider to have, let's say, some, I don't know how to put it other than horrific goals. If what brings me pleasure and what I want to do is to go out and murder, rape, and kill a sociopath or someone along those lines. Now, we may both agree that there is something potentially broken, for lack of a better term, but at the same time, their goal is to cause pain to others because for them, that brings them pleasure. Depending on what it is, for whatever reason. And it may not be that. It may be that they honestly feel that for some reason the planet's overpopulated and the ethical thing to do is take out 1 million people with a nuke or whatever it is. But so it doesn't have to necessarily be pleasure-based. But what I'm saying is that if I change the goal, I can change morality across the board. And therefore, at least as far as I'm concerned, that throws it into a subjective view because it is completely dependent on the goals, the subjective goals from each individual. Does that make
But is it
sense?
ethical?
All right, so
I'm going to follow. Let me follow on with that for a second.
Oh, go right ahead, MyContext.
When I was speaking of morality as being a hierarchy of values held,
Oh,
the
your mic's coming a little auto-tuned.
how about now? Better?
Better, a little.
Okay. When I spoke of morality as being a hierarchy of values held by an individual, I was pointing out that morality is intrinsically subjective, and as a byproduct of the values held, you wind up with objective facts within regard to those points of value. So if it is the case that we value babies, there are objective facts that you don't do with regard to harming babies, or things that you do with regard to supporting the well-being of a baby. You know, and as Negation P pointed out, those subjective aspects define all the other qualities effectively.
So, okay. Thank you for clearing that up. Now, something I just want to ask, though, to clear up a point a little further. This subjectivism, to be fair, this gets a lot of... This is not really a fair treatment of subjectivist position.
Hold on. I'm not claiming... See, there's where it gets kind of dicey. Because you can claim it as objective or subjective, depending on how you look at it. At the bottom of it, they're subjective. Every moral claim I've heard thus far is at the bottom of it, subjective.
But I just wanted to clarify something. Something that people unfairly say of this position is that it leads to arbitrariness, which I think is contestable, because if human beings as a group evolve, then what they are going to value is not necessarily arbitrary, because it's determined by background facts about our origins. And thus, even though people might end up not having or not always being in line with the same goals or ideas, they're always going to be next to or near each other. They're not going, with only a few outliers.
Mind if I jump in?
I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. Go right ahead, Baldie.
The possessing of subjective moral values, for example, I might find one thing moral that Max does not find moral, in no way speaks to or disproves the existence of a natural good or end. In fact, you might even say that the possessing of subjective moral values is actually evidence for an attempt at reaching that objective natural end. So one's, I think, little babies, I don't know why we're obsessed with babies, but a little baby should be supported because it's a moral thing to do. And you might press me for why that's moral, and what I will try to do is justify my morality based on a natural cause or end or something. Someone else might try to do it differently, but the principle is still the same. We're trying to reach an objective good, but describing it in ways only that human language can only just about cover.
But notice what you did. You took a subjective thing, and you can then create objective claims on that subjective thing. And in order to...
No, I derive subjectivity from the objective.
What's the objective? Give me an objective moral statement.
Oh, okay. It is... Alright, it is wrong to kill... It is wrong to kill babies for fun. That's usually the fun one we usually decide, or...
And that objective wrong is predicated on valuing babies.
Right, but babies are intrinsically valuable.
Yes, they are.
Based on what?
Wait a
okay.
second, context. I'd have to challenge you there, Max. I mean,
Okay, go
where
right
are you getting intrinsic value for a baby?
All right, so because my wife will kill me. Nah.
Well, mine will too if she hears me say that. But
okay, we can be humorous here. So, okay, so this is where we come to our essential human nature. If man is a rational and social animal, then what does it mean to be social? To be social means to put the community at a high, to put a community at a high level. This is what a good human being does. So this is the difference between a good human and a bad human. If man is a rational animal, a rational social animal, then actions which exemplify that are going to be the behaviors that indicate that's a good human, whereas ones that do not are bad. Now, when it comes to a baby, babies are intrinsically valuable to us precisely for that reason. Because we are social animals, our goodness is predicated upon how well we care for that child.
But again, Max, I mean, you defining goodness, a good human being in the way you do,
right,
is, in my opinion, kind of arbitrary. I mean, you're just throwing that out there and saying this is. And I'm not seeing how you get to that point, even to begin with a man.
Actually, that is wait, Baldie. That's actually very. So that's related to G.E. Moore's. He called this the naturalistic fallacy. This is when you tend to define the good analytically, and thus you make it meaningless, in a sense. So to say that, so for example, if I was to say that triangles are three-sided, G. Moore would say, well, of course, that's obvious, but that's just from the definition of what a triangle is.
No, not at all, because I can demonstrate the three sides. Whereas when you're placing
what makes
these
those
values,
three sides intrinsically a triangle? Why not call it a circle?
Well, again, you can change the verbiage, but what I'm saying is if you want to mathematically describe a triangle, there is a specific way that you have to do that, and depending on the type of triangle, then there's even subsets of that triangle. But what I'm saying is that I'm not trying to define a way. Well, maybe I am, because
I have an example.
I got the heart. The heart of it is when it comes to concepts, and morality is a concept.
Right.
We are free to create whatever criteria that we decide for that concept. Whereas when we're speaking of the world, we have objective things to work with regard to the world. In which case, we're doing descriptive things, and we have an objective base for it.
Oh, okay. So here's the distinction. When I say man is a rational animal, I'm not or a rational social animal, I should say. I'm not just arbitrarily picking properties of us that I want to be in there. What I'm doing is I'm showing. What I'm doing is I'm taking things that are actually true of us.
Right, and Max, that one I wouldn't have a problem with. It's the two qualifiers that you put before that.
Which is?
God, I can't remember how you phrased it, but basically a good man is going to, I think you said something about value humanity and something along those lines.
So maybe I should just break it down into the terms that make that up. A good exemplar of a rational social animal is one that does things which are rational and social, and are in respects to his biology. So it's kind of like finding a good specimen, in a sense. You meet the standard. You meet this standard or criteria much better than other types of men, and this is the same thing that a botanist might do.
We're still not talking about ethics, though.
Well, yeah, I think we're getting there, because the utility is going to spring from this, and I think that, again, when you kind of preface that by saying that it's good for the species or it's good for the society, you're placing an arbitrary value on that society.
No, I'm not. So this is why it's not arbitrary.
Okay.
What does it mean to be social? It means to be a member of a greater community or society, and there are things that better enable that and things which do not. These are relations that we actually study in sociology and anthropology, and if you don't look at human beings from a social dynamic, then if you go in there thinking that humans aren't social, well, you're going to have a very confusing time. Whereas
you misunderstood. I understand that we're social beings.
Right.
I understand that we're dependent on that social structure. We need that.
Mhm.
But what I'm saying is humanity in general, man himself, stating that that is an important, let's say, element of the universe is
Well, we're
where
not
I'm
saying
not.
it's an important element of the universe. We're saying that when, in regards to morality, we're all trying to discuss human flourishing. What is the best way to bring about human flourishing? Yes.
Okay, so I mean that's where I would have
So,
the problem, and that's
okay,
kind of where I've
well,
run
we're
into
not
with Ozzy.
defining. We're not saying this is to be arbitrary means to just not have a reason for why this is good. The reasons we're giving are quite numerous. One, man is inherently social. Therefore, to fulfill one's social need is good. Two, human beings propagate the species by copulation and producing babies. Therefore, babies are inherently valuable because they can produce more babies, thus bringing about more humans.
Okay,
Therefore, it is naturally good for a human being to reproduce and to value babies.
okay, so
Human beings
let,
value each other inherently, it seems, a lot of the time. And when they don't, we call that a mental illness. So
okay,
when
but
we're speaking to normative morality, the reasons are quite clear. We're taking what we have observed in the natural world, whether via evolutionary biology or sociology or something else, and saying, we seem to act this way, why is it? But I'd also like to point out that when I said the holding of subjective moral standards isn't um, does not preclude there being an objective morality, what I meant, and I think people kind of miss the point, was that when we discuss one's whether something is good or not, that speaks to there being a good to discuss. Now, we can get we can talk about the epistemology of things all night long. However,
fine, let's get to an application. Is
yeah,
that's where
the
I was
very
trying to go.
definition of ethics is the practical application of one's
Right.
morality
So
to difficult moral situations.
okay, so let's use what you guys just said right there, and the virtue based ethics of flourishing and all of that,
Right.
and then let's try this
Well,
with.
human flourishing is Aristotelian,
Okay, well,
and I wouldn't really call myself a virtue ethicist.
okay,
That's mostly me.
okay. Well, anyway, going with y'all's kind of constraints. If
Right.
we use, and again, it's going to be a bit of a stretch, but to me, it's kind of, I don't know, that a lot of times the best way to get to it is kind of do some of these outrageous kind of thought experiments to box ourselves in, so to speak. But let's say
I
that,
do have one request then.
yeah,
Usually when a hypothetical, and you might not do this, but I've noticed on G+, when a hypothetical is raised, it's done with the intention of it being unanswerable. So if this is going to be a hypothetical,
no,
let's
no, no,
make it one that is fair-minded.
right, no, I do have an answer, at least from my perspective. And
Okay.
so I don't know if that means anything, and it probably you may disagree, but let's say that we become aware that the galaxy is teeming with life, and for some reason, whatever you want to say, humanity needs to be eradicated, or the, let's say, billions of other species, each of which containing billions of individuals, will no longer exist. I mean, however you want to set that up from a scientific or a sci-fi standpoint, have
Okay.
fun with it.
Okay. Mind if
Would
I take a
the
crack at this
yeah,
first, Max?
would the ethical thing to be to sacrifice humanity, or would it be better, kind of the trolley experiment, to sacrifice the one for the many?
Mind if I take first crack at that, Max?
Sure, but I get a second crack.
I have two things to say about this. One, the issue with this particular hypothetical is that, from my point of view, being relying very heavily on natural law to decide what is ethical, I actually have to have something natural to look at to decide what one's purpose might be in that situation. So that, with just saying, oh, there are suddenly aliens, okay, accepted for the hypothetical and its purposes. It's not going to work in natural law because that can only really go with what is observable of our natural habitat and us ourselves. But on a different ethical level, I would say no. If it is true, and I posit this as merely an if, really big if, because I know you're an atheist, that human life is created in the image of Almighty God, and it was Almighty God that breathed life into human nostrils, then no. There is nothing more valuable in the entirety of the universe than humanity. We are infinitely valuable by definition of our being human. I
Excuse me.
realize that's very
There's a problem in that
subjective.
statement. No, there's a problem with that statement. If you're positing a creator, then it also stands to reason that the creator would have created them as well. So this ultimate value argument falls
Which
apart.
is also why I said in the first part of my answer this isn't going to work because, one, I don't see any reason to believe in extraterrestrial life. However, for the sake of the hypothetical,
But for the sake of the hypothetical,
it is humanity. I don't know about the rest of the aliens. If you want to add that into the hypothetical, then we're going to have an entirely...
Well, no, I'm saying you cannot talk about the other. With, that means that you are not answering the hypothetical. So I can grant that you're not or cannot answer the hypothetical for whatever reason.
Well, no,
but
I cannot answer the hypothetical because I don't see...
Which means that you can't actually address the hypothetical.
Context. I think he, I mean, not to cut you off, man, but I think from his theology and his worldview, for lack of a better term, I do think he's being honest. I do think that he is giving an accurate depiction of what someone with the beliefs that he has would be, for lack of a better term, compelled, if not forced, into the decision that they would make. And
but that would mean that you. Well, then I guess that's a question.
I can't really understand you through the microphone at the moment. I'm afraid.
How about now? Better?
No, it's not.
Okay. I guess the question that I'm having is, if you're positing a creator, why wouldn't the aliens be created as well?
Well, I'm going by what... Look, as a Christian, I believe in special revelation, as well as public revelation. The Bible is one such creature. And in Genesis, I read that human life is created in the image of God. Now, if you'd have let me finish, I'd have, when you first said, well, doesn't it posit that he created those as well? Well, yes, he also created dogs and cats. Dogs and cats are not on the same level as value as human life.
Okay.
Now, the reason that I mean, the main sticking point for me is humanity is what God says is created in his image. Now, and that's why I hold humanity, above all else, to be the most valuable thing in the universe. So when it comes to this hypothetical, I'm going to struggle with it simply because of the basis of the hypothetical. It posits something that just does not fit into my worldview. So I think if we're going to test my ethical theories, we're going to need something that is actually based in what we know, rather than aliens.
Would you mind if I answer the...
Before we leave that.
Yeah, and Max, let Max go, and then me and you can come back on, because I think that, I mean, again, I enjoyed that, Baldie. I think that was fair. I think that was a good answer. Of course, I've got a couple of questions, but at the same time, I enjoyed that. I think it was fair, and you were honest, and I can't expect anything else.
So, for my answer, I would say that the best thing to do at that point was to quarantine the Earth and Earthlings. I'm pretty sure if, in this hypothetical, it would be possible for aliens who are much more advanced than us to do just that, especially if it means keeping maybe some kind of disease from going on. And you could actually quarantine it to the point of just our solar system. So
what I was envisioning, and again, it's a stupid little deal, but I was envisioning something to the effect that, because of our orbit, because of the way that our solar system is situated, we would somehow, let's say when Andromeda comes and runs into us in the next few billion years, that it creates let's say a black hole or something that would basically go rogue and destroy the entire combined set of galaxies. So it's not a problem with humanity, so to speak. It's more of a mechanical type problem. And at that point, for whatever reason, they don't have time to evacuate. Let's say there's not interstellar travel possible, but because of what they can and can't do, they could destroy the planet.
Would it be in the hands of the aliens then, as the moral agents, or would it be in the hands of the Earthlings?
Well, again, I don't think that the actual actor really matters. What I'm asking is
I
that
actually do think it does.
okay, well then let's say that they come to us and they say, look, okay, that's even better. They send us directions
Right.
via whatever, and say, look, you have to self-detonate this planet. We can't get there in time to do it. We have no way of getting there at all or whatever, but you have to self-detonate your planet to clear the path for this whatever that's going to cause the catastrophe of both us and Andromeda.
Oh,
So
okay.
it is on us that we have to basically self-eradicate.
Oh, all right. So if that were the case, then I would say that that's basically the equivalent of suicide and morally unacceptable.
We'd also have to build a lot of Death Stars.
That is.
Yeah, but I guess when you're saying that suicide is unethical,
Right. I have some kind of justification for that.
well, yeah, and that's what I'm saying is I think that in the same way that Baldie was relying on his belief in Scripture, I think that it would end up being the same thing with you as far as it's more scripturally based because of the suicide, that how God looks at suicide.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I mean that's one reason. But on natural law, we can actually justify suicide apart from revelation. Why that would be wrong. So if our goods are found within our ends, then what is the ultimate thing sustaining our rational and social faculties, but our very life itself? So if the end of life is indeed to live, then I think we do have a vested moral interest in keeping us alive. And now, if it's on the hand of the aliens, as the actors, could I answer on that perspective, or would you be uninterested in going from there?
No, please. I mean, like I said, let's
Okay.
let's go anywhere this takes us. I have no problems at all.
Awesome. So with the aliens, so I'm also a firm believer in using life as a life has to be an end in itself and not a means to an end, to echo Immanuel Kant. I think that it is wrong to use human beings as a mean. It dehumanizes us. It makes us a mechanism. It would mean that we're using one another in the same way that we use any kind of instruments. And frankly, so we are no longer seeing human life as valuable intrinsically, but rather we're devaluing it, and that would be wrong in itself. So and it's very similar to the trolley problem. There's a distinction between using a lever to change the track of a train. So instead of hitting 5 people, it hits 1 person, because you're not using that 1 person who's hit as a means. Rather, it's a consequence of trying to save 5 lives. But in the case where you're trying to push a fat man into a trolley, that person's life is no longer seen as an end in itself, but as a means to obtaining something greater. So if there is a case where the aliens could kill us in the sense of the first example, where we're a consequence and not a means to an end, then yes, I'd say the aliens would be justified in that scenario, but they wouldn't be justified if it was like in the first scenario, where they were using us as a means to an end.
Okay, but in kind of to just one pushback on that is that
Right.
We tend to find, I kind of view this in the same way because like you said, I value life, and it's not intrinsic to humanity specifically, and only humanity. I'm looking at it as more sanctions is what's the value here. So in the same way that I would view someone sacrificing themselves by jumping on a grenade to save everybody else in the foxhole, that is an honorable, that is a good action, at least from my
perspective. Honor is
right.
in your view.
Right. Whereas from what I'm hearing from you guys, because it would be suicide, even though that person saved more human life, it may still be a negative.
There's a difference between suicide and sacrifice. I've had to go through this with several atheists on G+, actually, so if you like, I can give you the spiel.
Yeah, please. And while you're doing that, kind of tell me why that sacrificing all humanity for the sanctions of the universe would not fall under that.
Okay, well, you have to look at this. Again, I'm not going to speak to the hypothetical because I find the hypothetical to be silly. It doesn't. Because my very basis of every ethical decision I'm going to make, apart from natural law, is that human beings are infinitely valuable because they are human beings, then I'm just not going to be able to speak to your hypothetical. I'm sorry, it's just not something I have
Okay,
the
but
capacity to do.
I guess all I would ask Baldy on that is that in the same way that, like I mentioned earlier, is that embracing the possibility of being wrong. I would assume that if it is demonstrated sometime down the road that your beliefs in God are, however, changed, either away from Catholicism or, as far as I am, into the atheist view, then you would you'd be forced back into where I am. So if you can kind of just, even though
Well,
you can qualify it by saying that, look, in
okay.
reality, if this happened tomorrow, I would have to stand by what I believe, which is honorable and which is completely rational. I understand that. But if, in order to be fair to the questions, we need to be comfortable enough stepping out of our beliefs to kind of wear each other's hats.
I thought the idea of the question was to test my theories.
I guess the way that I looked at it is it's testing the concept of objective morality and then its application in an ethical situation. So
Okay. Well,
so it's more
when
all-encompassing instead of just you, I guess is the way I looked at it. So sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, you have to remember, I also believe the objective morality isn't something one possesses, it's something that is objectively true, and everyone possesses their individual sort of get at it. They're trying to reach that objective moral.
But you're not saying that anyone knows what this is, are you?
No, I am saying people know what it is. And this all people rightly call God, to quote Aquinas. The objective is grounded in the root of all existence, which is God. And we can get into the cosmological and teleological arguments.
No, I'm not hearing a goal in there. I'm lost, completely lost. It means nothing in my world. I'm trying to understand what it is you're talking about.
Groundable being. I mean that all things have their root of existence in God.
But you're not telling me a goal.
I was about to. The goal the goal is entirely dependent on the final, on the efficient and final causes. It's Aristotelian metaphysics.
So I think right now we're just going back and forth between normative and meta.
Yes, I was about to say that, and I was going to go into the whole suicide versus sacrifice bit.
Yeah, could you just give us that?
To share something really simple. I'm hearing a lot of concepts, but I'm trying to get to. Let's just say that in terms of me getting what you're getting at, I'm looking for some actionables so that it will make sense to me.
Oh, all right.
Without an actionable, I have no framework by which to review it. It just falls apart.
So right now, I think we're divided into two things. We're divided on the one hand of the meta-ethical claim, which we went over a bit ago. I think I tried to ground it in humanity's rational, social, and biological nature, but then what was brought up was a normative case of trying to take that understanding and put it in a normative aspect. So I'm not sure where to go from here. Should we go on to the normative example of aliens in the Earth, or ought we continue in metaethics where we keep clarifying what the good is?
I would like to know what the good is, and then we can exercise what that good is. For example,
Ned, are you good with that?
Yeah, that's fine. We can go that way for now. I don't have a problem dropping that the normative side right now. So.
Oh, okay. So I think so. I started off with we start off with the essence or the universal nature of humanity, what it means to be human, and what I gave was our capacity for reason, our social capacities, and our capacity and our ends as biological organisms. So actions which exemplify, or I should say, habits which exemplify this nature, are to be considered good and our aim and goal, whereas habits that are not vices, that is, as opposed to virtues, deprive us of this goal or this end. So that, for us, I think, is how we would define and understand what good is. And it's something that is essential for understanding humanity, because these are capacities that we have to which are indispensable for fields such as biology, sociology, psychology, and things of that nature. So I think they
Does that help MyContext?
I don't know that it did. But I'm going to, at this moment, hold, and we'll wait, because I'm having that solid interlinkage to something problem.
Right. So these are properties of concrete things, like such as me and yourself and every other human being.
Yeah.
I think that they are properties instantiated by us. They're things that are part of the world. They're not just things we project onto the world.
There's where it gets dicey. Because
yeah. Okay. I think maybe
that's where we're having problems.
Okay.
Because I'm looking at the nature of what, like you use the word intrinsic value.
Okay.
And that is not a word that I would dare use with regard to anything, quite frankly.
Right.
Everything is a relative value to, it's a completely subjective thing as to whether it has value or not.
Yeah, I mean, value is considered to be the term value is considered to be tied to very subjective things, but a definition that Ozymandias has coined to me, and I think maybe it bears repeating here, is an objective value is a value to which all rational, healthy beings ought to hold to, and I think we can grasp what those are by understanding what a rational, healthy human being is.
Let me give you a case.
Okay.
That is always a contested thing. It's a big deal. It's fought all the time, which is abortion.
Okay.
So walk through the adjudication process for me with regard to abortion as to whether it is right or wrong. What are the considerations involved in that question?
The two considerations that are involved in that question is the dilemma between the value of life and the value of autonomy. So, ought we value the autonomy of a woman, or ought we value the life of the fetus? And is the fetus a life that is worth valuing as a human being, or is it not yet a human being? So let's go with the first one of whether or not a fetus is a human. If a fetus is a human being, and I'm not sure if you guys are willing to grant that, should it be argued for right now, or are you willing to accept that for the sake of arguments?
I would conditionally accept it, but my condition would be once brain activity is present, then yes, it is that would be my my line. That's where I would delineate non-human from human.
Now, what happens to people in comas? Sorry, not the point.
Not the point.
That's an absolutely great point, because in the same way that we will allow humans that, for lack of a better term, unplug them when they're on life support and they're brain dead, that is, I would say, just as I'm losing my words now, but just as
it's a determinable fact.
Applicable as a fetus in the womb that doesn't have brain activity.
All right. How about I would disagree with that. I think it starts at conception, but I'll tentatively agree to brain activity because you guys are tentatively agreeing to it being considered a human life. Cool.
And I don't want to put words in my context. He may have a
Oh
different.
no, that was fine. That because that delineation is a part of my review as well. So that's fine.
Okay.
Okay. Cool. So moving on from there, the fetus being a human being is at that point is considered to be a being worth valuing, and this is how we step up. So we first agree that, or we first reason that human life is something worth valuing in itself because of the fact that we're social animals. We care for other human beings, like caring, loving, respecting. These are virtues that best exemplify our nature as social beings. Beings who, if we could take a virtue, understand it in a social context, and see human flourishing, then of course it's a value that we ought to adhere to. Now, to be consistent, and consistency is an ingredient of rationality, uh, we should apply it across the board as wide as possible without it resulting in any profundant absurdities. So, with both those things in mind, we would consider that the fetus is a being that is worthy to live. Now, on the other hand, we also consider that bodily autonomy is also good because society that has a tyrannical basis for controlling people's bodies, enslaving one another, that sort of thing. That doesn't breed social creatures. Tends to that tends to be horrible for human flourishing and well-being. So we already have two values. Which one is kind of the more fundamental value? And I would say that it would be wrong in the case of abortion for two main reasons. One, if there is a child, if there is a child that's been brought into the world, we ought to care for them. It is our obligation to use whatever resources possible, whether it be our bodies, our property, what have you. I consider it analogous to a situation of, imagine if someone was stuffed into your weather balloon and you only found out about it while you were in midair. Well, that is your property. You don't have the right to push them over and let them die or crash into their death. Rather, in such a scenario, for the sake of consistency, we would actually say that, yeah, we're obliged to do whatever possible up until the point where they can take care of themselves, or where we can at least reasonably guarantee they could be taken care of. So that would be my own perspective on the abortion issue. And this is what I think, keeping in with my meta-ethics, but at the same time being very helpful to normative ethics. And even if you guys might not agree with my conclusion, I hope you can see that at least it has some veracity.
Well, but I mean, even though it has veracity, and for the most part, I agree with it. But in the same way that it seems that it's, and I don't want to use this term because it's going to be kind of, I guess, seem aggressive, but limited in its sight, because it addresses only, from what I can tell, a healthy child and a healthy mother. If we bring what I would consider to be more of a real-world scenario, where we have a child that, although it may have brain activity, is going to grow up, if it survives at all, extremely, let's say, limited, if not in pain, or secondarily, for whatever reasons, the complications could cost the life of the mother. Based on, again, my very limited knowledge of Catholicism, I would assume that you guys would say we have to, in both cases, allow that child to come to term.
In the first case, yes. In the second case, no. And here's why. In the second case, if it poses some problem for the mother, in terms of her own life, for example, the Catholic Church actually does rule, and it has good reason to, why
It's basically the trolley conundrum in a different setting.
Yeah,
Exactly. If you're taking out the fetus and letting it die outside, you're not. The distinction is, you're doing, the end is letting the mother live, and taking out that child and putting it in a place where it can die. You're not intentionally trying to kill the child. You're just separating it from its mother. It's
The
kind of
intent is to save the mother. The consequences, the child might, because it might survive, might die.
Yep.
Okay. I can see
babies are being born at 24 weeks and coming to term.
And I can see the rationale behind that, but at the same time, to me, it's a bit of hair splitting. I mean, and a little bit of verbiage.
I'm afraid the ethics requires hair splitting.
And a lot of verbiage.
We cannot ever, at any point, and neither can you, claim to have one answer to fit everything. We're going to have to look at each case as it comes.
And that's why, and that's perfect. That's exactly why I say, Baldie, it is a subjective state.
Well,
I would like to
say something is subjective isn't to state that
there is no objective.
To say that something is particular or case by case isn't to say that it's subjective. It's just to state that it's really hard to come to universal principles. That's about it.
But you have to remember, Catholicism teaches we live in a fallen, broken world, and it's striving for the good that is good, not necessarily hitting it.
Could I hope you don't consider this burden shifting, but could I pose kind of a normative conundrum for you guys?
Please do. Yeah, that's fun. That'd be great. At least I'm good with it, Context, if you are.
Fine. Definitely fine.
Oh, okay. So this is going to be a bit embarrassing, but I published a blog post a year or so back called "The Morality of Ejaculating on Babies."
Okay.
And it was mostly a kind of critique on utilitarian, or at the very least consequential ethics. Although I think MyContext might find a way to sidestep this conundrum because he considers virtue ethics to be kind of a guiding principle. What is exactly wrong, consequently speaking, with a father masturbating on a child that won't remember it? I mean, it's essentially substance akin to mucus. If it doesn't get into any orifice, it's not going to make you sick. You could wipe it off. Yet at the same time, if anyone wants to point to any negative consequence, it wouldn't be hard. I wouldn't be hard pressed to find terrible consequences in more mundane activities like driving a car. How, based on this, would you say that it is okay for a father to ejaculate on their newborn child or their young adolescent child who isn't going to remember any of it? And if it's okay, then do you consider the weirdness as just being a byproduct of our society, or if you think it is in a sense wrong or we shouldn't do it at all, what reason would you make that off of?
Okay, as far as being, again, objectively wrong, I don't think anything's objectively wrong. So I wouldn't say that. And as far as would I personally find it wrong, would I find it disgusting and repulsive? Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And the reason, at least the reason that I would give for that visceral reaction, is because anytime we look at sex in any way, at least what I would consider to be a normal human being, and again, that's arguable, but a normal human being, and again, this has to do with genetic and my belief in the natural, is that if I propagate with my own offspring, there's a very high probability that there's going to be problems with...
Now, hold on now. This isn't about propagating.
This is about it ties into
ejaculating and having...
Right, exactly. Wait, let me get there, though.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, is that any sexual act that I would engage in with my children present, let alone them having anything to do with it, is going to at least in me, because of not only the rational understanding of what would happen if it was a sexual act with them, but also the what I would consider more primal, instinctual understanding of that. Anything that goes along those lines is going to be distasteful.
Could I ask for a point of clarification then, considering
Yeah,
you
please.
brought up primal things? One
Yeah.
might think those are intrinsic values, but I'll skip over that and simply ask Zoroastrianism. It was quite often the case that in Zoroastrianism, the nobles would marry each other's siblings, as in brother would marry sister.
Right.
They would call this the sister wife, and it was a reenactment of the brother and sister god and goddess that got together and did the, what one usually does. That would then lead me to believe that you would see no problem with, say, ejaculating on an infant in a culture where we don't have these sorts of hang-ups.
No,
Would that
because
be true to say?
as far as kind of along the same lines as what you were saying about my conundrum, is that it's hard, and I'm going to try to, but it's hard for me to put myself in that society where that type of marriage would be, okay, because for whatever reason, I still find that,
Well, I wasn't talking about Zoroastrian marriages. I was simply saying that we have evidence of societies. Yeah,
right.
Unlike your conundrum, I'm actually appealing to evidence that we have of societies where this is acceptable.
Right, and what I'm saying is
a society in which the birthright, I don't know, the first thing that the baby had to have done to it when it was born was to be ejaculated on, as strange as that sounds.
Right, and here's the instinctual, the naturalistic reason that I think the vast majority of us would find it distasteful, if not completely repulsive, to think of that act, is because we also understand that if we were to engage in that with a child that young, there is absolutely nothing but harm that would result to that child. And again, even wait a second, Baldie. Even though we're not actually doing anything to that child, the same way that if there is a rotten piece of meat laying anywhere around us, it is very difficult for us to consume even healthy food, because we have that visceral reaction of knowing this is not a good thing for us and or the species, even in the proximity. So in the same way, if we have a child there, especially when that young, and we're doing something along those lines, it's going to be difficult and a visceral reaction in the same way that spoiled meat or a rotten carcass would have, even though we're not eating the carcass, even though we're not doing anything to the carcass. Being around that is going to make it difficult for most of us to ingest food.
Wait, if I might just bring in 2 points of clarification.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't necessarily need to be sexual. I mean, the person could just be doing it for laughs. Like they don't get any sexual thrill out of it. They just find it funny. And second of all, couldn't we find more harm in more mundane activities, like let's say driving cars at high speeds? There have been studies that have shown if we decreased the national speed limit by, let's say, 30 miles, it would be a guaranteed lifesaver for a lot of people. Yet we consider that those wasted lives are worth the convenience of the general population.
Right.
On that basis, it seems that if we're going to consider this wrong, based just on the consequences alone, it seems that driving cars would yield greater or worse consequences. Seem to also be thrown out the window as well.
Well, but see, Max, the difference is that since, and again, given my beliefs, we haven't evolved to the point to understanding that driving 60, 70, 80 miles an hour is intrinsically harmful to us. We feel safe within our little car and cocoon. There's no visceral reaction, at least I'm a pilot. I mean, I can do literally hundreds of miles an hour, and I feel safe in my little cocoon. So there's no intrinsic driver there. There's no primal instinct away from that, because it's been very, very recent that nothing's evolved either yet or it may never. Whereas throughout again, if we take evolution, throughout the species coming up, that type of engagement would be extremely have negative consequences if it was taken to the next step. So again, in the same way that we have a visceral reaction to a carcass because through our evolution, through the evolutionary process, we have come to understand, even if it's not rational, that that is harmful. In the same way that having that child there when you're doing that could potentially, if taken to the next step, could be harmful. We have the same type of visceral reaction in that it's a negative thing.
I'd like to point out you're appealing to a very natural law-esque ethic.
Sorry, before we just pile on, I actually want to bring MyContext into it. He's been silent for a bit, and I don't want to exclude him.
Yeah, sorry about that, man. I know I step on you. Go.
Oh, no problem. I was just thinking about it. This is where the blurring of morality and sociological constructs get into play, in part, in that as a matter of principle, the act itself is dangerous. Because, yes, we could say that under general circumstances everything is fine, but because our fluids tend to carry disease also, that is not necessarily a good thing. And at the moment, I can only think about the Jewish practice where they do the circumcision and they suck the blood off. And herpes babies have, been infected. So from my standpoint, it's an assault to well-being. The activity is an assault to well-being. Now, if we were to stipulate that there is no biological hazard in this, then it can actually degenerate to a purely sociological issue in terms of what is considered to be acceptable or not. Because, in part, one is suspicious that one may do something that can be harmful to the child if they're willing to ejaculate on the child. And it becomes an issue of damage to the child, and you become concerned that there may be more than just maybe less. The idea that it's not sexual becomes a concern, because if it is sexual, there is the chance that they may do something to the child. And that is the issue that surrounds a lot of people with regard to such actions. It's not acceptable because there's this other theme that is thought to be of the person perpetrating it that would be damaging to the child. And the whole idea of getting to that point is unacceptable. So the act in and of itself may not necessarily cause harm, but the projection of notions upon the individual doing that is considered to be dangerous.
All right, cool. Thank you for that well thought out response. One thing that I actually found interesting was you didn't really bring in your virtue ethic into that, because there's also I thought, and this is something I view as a virtue ethicist, we also have how virtues might come into place with maybe deciding what actions should guide which consequences we take, or how they interplay, maybe in that specific example. Would you like to touch on that, or do you think that...
well, I actually did when I talked about the character aspect.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I might have missed that.
Yeah, the moment you start considering the extrapolation of the character aspect, it's already become a degenerate notion with regard to the suspicions held.
Ah, okay, yeah. You know what? That's actually a good point. Cool. All right, so I think I'm pretty much done with that particular normative example. So I gave one negation. I believe you gave one, although we didn't come back to it. Would you like to touch on that again, or do you think maybe some other normative example? And MyContext, you gave one as well with the abortion. Baldie, would you like to throw one out there, if that's good, and if also Ned doesn't mind?
I'm good with that. Go ahead, guys. I mean.
Oh, okay.
Well, we've only got half an hour left, and I am exceptionally tired and cannot think of a normative example on my current level of sleep.
If you like, you could just give this one example, and then we can close it off with closing remarks, and then we can end the broadcast.
I would like one clarification.
Oh,
you
okay.
know, on a point that was said earlier. And exactly what does it mean to be made in God's image? What does that mean?
Oh, so many things. That's a question that people have been trying to answer for a long time. By a long
Okay,
time, I mean 5,000 years.
well, no. The reason I asked that is when you dismiss the aliens as not being made in God's image, it struck me, what do you mean by God's image? Because none of the attributes claimed match up properly.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would
Well,
actually hold that the aliens themselves were made in God's image too, if they're rational beings as well as we are.
Well, the reason I say we are made in God's image, as in human beings and not aliens, is because, one, my entire main point for just honestly saying, look, I don't think this is something that I can fairly answer, is because we don't actually have any evidence for aliens existing. Nor do we have any scriptural evidence, which is where I base this worldview on, that anyone save humanity will be in the image of God, because it is man that is in the image of God according to Scripture. So I think, I mean, I could very well be wrong. There could be rational aliens out there that are also in the image of God, but then does that mean Christ's sacrifice also applies to them, or did they have a different Messiah? Did it mean they fell as well, or was it only us that fell? Did they get put through the same test we get put through, or not?
Hold. You said test. How does test work?
Can you say,
Sufferings, trials, temptations.
if I could jump in?
Context. Context. I don't mean to cut you off, but I mean these questions, man, we could talk about for days.
Not a problem. Not a problem. I'll leave it off there.
You are asking my theological opinion here.
Yeah,
I am.
And I want to be fair because I mean, you know, they are hosting, and I don't want to try to get off. They want to stay with ethics. But I'll tell you one thing on that thing that you mentioned there, Baldie, for a second. That would be a very convincing point if there were aliens that showed up and they were believing in the same God that we did. That would be very compelling. But anyway, go on past that.
That would screw both of us over.
No. But that would be something that I could go with at that point. There's something there.
Yep, me too.
Right. Cool. So, Baldie, would you like to give your ethical conundrum, and then we could be off?
I should probably have done my homework. Ethical conundrum.
Go to bed. No, I'm just kidding.
Is it good to stay? Is it good to get up really early in the morning to give Americans a good show? I'm afraid I do not have the brain power at the moment to come up with anything off the top of my head.
All right. So maybe I think it'd be best for all of us to end the broadcast here with closing remarks, if that's cool.
Works for me. It means I can go back to bed.
Yeah, remember, it is your choice to live there, man. So I have no sympathy whatsoever for you. Especially considering I have to put up with the American, let's say, problems every day. So I'm more jealous that I am sympathetic.
You mean problem in that you are American?
That's good. I can definitely go with that. One encompassing problem.
Not one American I've met enjoys being American.
To be fair,
it's not so much being an American, it's the label that kind of goes with it in a broader context.
Hey, you're the guys that decided you were going to invade Iraq.
Bomb around. Okay. So for closing remarks, I'll kick it off to Ned, MyContext, Baldie. I'll close it from there, and I think it's and I'll even open the link up maybe for an after show.
All right. I'll try to keep it pretty short. Basically, I kind of fall back to where I started. Is that if you're going to have a set of morals that drives ethical action, I feel that you need to be able to give a very substantial defense of that. And we didn't get into this tonight, I understand, but the main problem I have from the theological end is that it seems to be that these ethics, these morals, are and again, I'll use this word even though I don't think it's as accurate as it should be, but are somewhat arbitrary in that the book gives you at least somewhat of your goals. They're laid out for you, and when you try to test those goals, it's almost impossible, if not extremely difficult. Whereas if you come at it from more of a naturalistic standpoint and say, we're doing this because, even throwing in virtue ethics, I think that makes it, a lot more, you don't run into the problems that you do when you just told what to do, so to speak. And I know I'm overgeneralizing, and I apologize for that. So, but I'll cut it off there, because if not, I'm going to ramble for 20 minutes.
Okay, MyContext, take it away.
As we're discussing, I'm realizing that we have larger fissures of disconnect than I was really imagining before. There's a lot of ambiguities that I see when people speak of what's right or wrong, and as I listen to how you were defining it, it really seemed to be stepping away from reality more and more as you spoke about the way you saw it, Max. Mm-hmm. And that disconnect makes it less and less a point of reality, but more a construct that is just being evoked and not necessarily relating to reality to me.
All right, fair criticism. Baldie?
Arbitrary is defined as based on a random choice or personal whim rather than any reason or system. So what Max and I have done over the past nearly 2 hours is give reason after reason and system after system as to why we think certain things are good and certain things are bad. I think the accusation of being arbitrary actually fits Negation's and Context's position more than it fits ours. The simple reason for this is where we gave naturalistic reasons but said that our morality is grounded in what is observable via the natural law, as well as what is revealed in Scripture. I realize I don't hold to Scripture. These are still reasons to believe a thing, whereas they, though they do not use arbitrary themselves, will just straight up admit that they think it is completely up to the individual, and there's not really a reason as to why one thing is wrong or right. There is simply whatever it is they think, which I think fits arbitrary far more than our own views. And that's me done.
All right. I'm not going to... So, in terms of what I learned, I was very happy to have both the Negation and MyContext present here to represent one secular outlook, or at least 2 viewpoints on what can be considered one secular outlook. And I would encourage everybody listening that there are obviously going to be more than just the Catholic approach, or at least the Catholic approach as presented by me and Baldie, and the secular approach as represented by Negation, MyContext. I'd encourage everyone to start off by looking at ethics themselves. Start off with the metaethical, what goodness is, what evil means. Work your way up to the normative stuff, and look at this further. Always start off with your encyclopedia of philosophy, and work your way from there. It's always an interesting topic, and it's one that allows us to compare and contrast and construct ways of seeing the world, and doing so on a consistent basis. I thank everyone for joining us, both the viewers and my guests here. Have a good night, and the link will be posted on Google Plus publicly, and I'll give it to MyContext, Negation, and Baldie if they want to share it themselves. Good night.